Oh.
Ah!
No, what did I just do?
That was just when I
I think I can figure this out.
Yes, please, between you two hands.
There we go. Okay. Dave, we're recording.
We are recording? Okay.
We're recording. It's all yours. Do what I had to do.
If I could get your attention. It's a little odd to be speaking here. I'm not sure whether I'm speaking to that group or the people online, so I'm going to sort of split the difference and try not to ignore anybody. Thank you for being here this evening. I'm thrilled to see how many folks are in this room. I'm expecting a great conversation to go on at length tonight. And 2 more folks walk in the room as I'm speaking. Good to see you. I normally begin by announcing imminent guests. And I guess by that definition, the only one who meets the rule is the mayor. So Kevin, you're eminent this evening. Tomorrow we'll go on to something else. Thanks for being here. Future events for Before You Grow. Month of November will all be project specific. On Wednesday, November 8th, we will talk about the Rovino Lane Apartments, which is that SB 330 project up near Quarry Heights, corner of Jacqueline Lane and Rovino Lane. It began as somewhat controversial. It's been a little quieter since, but we're trying to get the neighbors and us in the same room so we can get different perspectives. Hopefully that'll be effective. That meeting will be at Kavanaugh Center up at 8th and G. November 13th, which is a Monday. We rarely do Mondays, have never done Mondays, but we had some scheduling conflicts. Will be the Spirit Living Senior Living Project in Riverfront. Another project that's been somewhat controversial. I'm not fully on board with it yet, but I have encouraged those folks to come and talk to us about how they see it, do they see that senior living can help activate a community core, a 15-minute neighborhood core? And I'm really pushing them hard to give me good answers on that question. So again, the neighbors around that project will be invited along with our more broadly community-based group. So I'm hoping for great in-person conversations. Tonight, we have a variety of participants. In addition to our keynote speaker, who I'll get to in a moment, I've asked 3 local architects to be here to maybe help out with local angles on architecture. If we go on so long, Alli needs to get to bed. She's in Central Time Zone, Arkansas. The 3 local architects can pick it up and go on, continue on. So with us is Bill Wolpert, Green Building Architects, Pete Gang, who is a climate change, climate adaptation, mitigation leader, and Chris Lynch of Mad Architects. You know, if I look around long enough, they're going to come to me.
So you gotta make sure you say Mad Architecture,
Yeah.
because if you Google Mad Architects, it's like a 4,000 person firm in Hong Kong.
I thought just recently, I convinced myself it was architects, my mistake.
No, we're waiting to hear from their lawyer anytime. But we were there first.
I appreciate the correction.
Yeah.
To be honest, had never heard of Alli Thurmond Quinlan until I saw her speak at Strong Towns in end of May, early June. Strong Towns does something called a Pekka Kuchek format, which is 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide, then automatic timer, so the speaker has to have his or her words timed to that slide. She did an incredible job that evening. One of the 2 best jobs anybody did. The other one was on historic Guatemalan architecture, just had no application to Petaluma. So Alli was the one, I could certainly see how it applied to Petaluma. So I thought about it a bit. I never had a chance to talk to her that week, but when I got home, I reached out to her. We exchanged dates, we exchanged logistics, and eventually we got her in place for this evening. The whole time I'm still thinking, was it just me who was impressed by that one presentation, and am I making a mistake here? And then those of you who were at the Dan Zach presentation 2 weeks ago, the former assistant planning director for Fresno, he heard us announce that Alli was going to be the speaker this evening, and his immediate response was, great choice. You really want to hear what she has to say. So I felt really good at that point. Alli, the show is yours.
All right. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited. It's been a pleasure setting this up and getting to see a little bit more Petaluma architecture. So we'll run through relatively quickly, what we've got here. And so as Dave mentioned, I'm in Arkansas. I come at housing from more or less every version and angle of housing that you can. So I have a company ethos that we build lovable, sustainable, generally walkable, dense places so that we can save productive and sensitive ecosystems from sprawl. And I come at that work from nearly every angle, but we really have an incredible focus on projects and advocacy work that achieves that protection goal. So as a longtime faculty member and recent board member for the Incremental Development Alliance, I also subscribe heavily to the ethos that you have to work deeply in a place for decades. And I often say that the worst thing about living in Arkansas is telling people that you live in Arkansas. It is lovely, but it is also 9 p.m. here. So if I flag a little, you'll have to be patient with me. So really, we do try to surround housing from every angle. There are a number of problems that any of us that work in housing know. And so I come at this as both a licensed landscape architect and an architect. So we do a lot of master planning. We also then have gotten into entitlement and policy writing with a new code company called the Incremental Code Consultants. We do sales and marketing, which gives us a lot of feedback from market buyers and renters kind of live on housing impacts. We do interior design. We also do, finance consulting and help people get projects financed. And then I'm also a small developer, as well as teaching other people how to be small developers. So some of the slides that you'll see tonight are from our partners, Kronberg Urbanists and Architects, who are other IncDev faculty, along with Dan Zach. And so we've partnered up on Inc Codes, which is a model incremental code that we'll talk about a little bit in a bit. So one of the things that I talked about at Strong Towns, where Dave first saw me, was who needs housing in your community and the demographics of housing, the way that changing demographics are really increasing some pressures that are occurring on housing generally. So American households skew really small, and that increases every year. So the most common household type in America is one person living alone. And that always sounds surprising when we say it, but as you think about it, I'm sure you can think of a number of people who live sometimes even in large homes by themselves for a variety of reasons. The next most common household type is a couple with no children. So that means that 58% of American households are sleeping in a single bedroom at night unless someone is snoring. But we're still thinking about planning as a country as though dwelling units equates to a family of 5. And in fact, a full 72% of American household units cater to nuclear families that are a minority of households. So instead, we need to be providing more intentional housing to the majority of Americans who only need 1 or 2 bedrooms on a daily basis. And you guys are probably familiar, right? This is across the nation for a lot of reasons that we can get into. American houses skew really large, and they skew expensive because we have an enormous mismatch between household size and the demographics of really what we need and who we're housing. So as we think about this, there's really a few impacts that I want you to think through. So one of these is that to house the same number of people as when our household size was much larger, we need twice as many individual dwelling units. And so as we start to think about this as dwelling units rather than, households, which gives us this kind of false idea of multiple people sharing a home, we can start to see the need for both a more diverse set of housing, right? A more diverse set of housing types and a more creative way of providing significantly less resources per household while still providing all of the amenities that people really find it to be a priority. And we're also wasting significant land disturbance and construction resources that are building homes that are completely out of scale to the market. And this is a problem that's grossly exaggerated someplace like California, where large lots have been required by zoning code for a number of years. So, we're starting to find ways to tuck additional units into those lots, but we really have to think about what it means for, one person to be housed in a 1,400 square foot lot, and what that starts to mean in terms of walkable densities, in terms of transit, in terms of supporting commercial uses, that we're really capping ourselves with a density, units per acre density that is really limiting us in a lot of our other goals in terms of sustainability, transit readiness, and supporting small businesses and walkable commercial setups. And these demographics are increasing, every year. We've seen this to be a really strong trend. And again, that, in the 1950s, when we had almost 4 people per household as our average household size, we need, an extra house by 2017 to house those people. And by 2030, we need twice as many houses as we did in 1950 before we even get to population growth. And one thing to really think about these single and dual person households is that they skew older and they skew more female, right? So that makes sense as we talk about it. Generally, people live alone because they can afford to, and households are a wide range of ages. But almost 60% of single person households are female. The average age is 57, while the average age in a household of 3 is 44. So in my line of work, designing housing for the majority of households means that we have a really necessary design focus on the preference of female buyers and design for aging in place. Single person household owners also tend to be the market that's most mismatched to their household size, often as a result of changing life circumstances like divorce, children leaving home, or the death of a spouse. Almost 3/4 of single person households have been in their homes for 10 years or more, including 40% who've been there for 20 years or more. And to me, this data really also points to the fragility of our single family neighborhoods in providing that range of housing types. Without unit diversity, residents have to stay in a house that's likely a maintenance burden in order to stay in a neighborhood that they love with an existing social network. So diversity of unit types also allows residents to move between unit types in their own neighborhood, moving into a larger home while they have kids at home, downsizing back into a smaller house as life circumstances make them single person households again. So we've approached this in our place with zoning that is still really focused on detached housing with small lot development. And one of the things that we tell communities across the country is that we have to focus on re-legalizing all of these naturally attainable housing types, because it's not just about what people can afford. There's also this enormous element of what cities can afford. And if you are at all familiar with strong towns, right, then you're really familiar with the idea that low density development patterns are bankrupting American places. And I've got some really cool slides from Kronberg Wall that we talked through me sharing tonight because I love them so much. And they prepared these for Georgia, and we've talked about them in a couple of different places, and they always feel really appropriate. So we want to talk about what our existing housing and what our existing housing laws allow us to build often, right? And we're making headway in this, and also we have a lot more headway to make. So in this existing zoning pattern of most of America, right, we might have on these 2 house lots a density of around 3 units an acre. Those are housing only 2 households. So we have an enormous number of people that don't have housing at all in this structure. And the infrastructure that's required to support these houses, right? We've got our sidewalks, we've got our curbs, we've got trees, hopefully, we've got our utility poles, traffic lights, street lights, our water lines, sewer lines, storm lines, paving, right? We've got our whole, what we think of as infrastructure. But the other thing that we have that is needing to support these units are our services, right? Our city services that are also paid for by the tax dollars that are generated by this housing type. So it's not just a problem of unhoused people. It's also a problem of housing infrastructure, right? There's an enormous amount of service that's going into 2 houses that, even though their value is skyrocketed, their property taxes is skyrocketed, is likely not paying enough in property taxes to support the services that's required to support them. So as we think about small lot infrastructure, small lot infill, and providing a diversity of housing types, we see the immediate sustainability benefits, right? We're not adding more pavement, we're not disturbing more land. We see the immediate social benefits. We're able to provide housing for people at a variety of price points and a variety of formats. We can create more sustainable neighborhoods long-term because they can adapt to shifting needs. But we're also then starting to pay for this infrastructure in a way that actually can pencil. In this example, with a variety of detached ADUs and ADUs above garages, as well as converting some homes into multiple units, we can get 6.5 times the number of units to spread those same infrastructure costs around. And most importantly, why we're here, right, is to talk about the fact that we also can find housing for all of these unhoused people, or people who are often couch surfing, right, living sort of along very tenuous means to avoid kind of losing housing. So one of the things that Kronberg Wall and I have partnered on is a model code that we in our work in Incremental Development Alliance often go to communities, and the first thing that we say is you have to fix your codes, right? And then we often have left them with that problem, leaving them up to, you know, a custom curation of often form-based codes as a great solution that lots of people are doing. And also there's lots of small towns that don't have the ability, the appetite, the budget to fully curate a new code. Most old bad codes also were model codes that were just relatively freely accessible, and they weren't tailored to specific places. So kind of this idea that we need to tailor our code replacement to really specific places, that every city needs its own custom, you know, couture code, has left a lot of cities not making any changes at all. And our policy changes tend to be the thing that until we get those right, we can't even begin to address all of the other problems with housing, right? Construction labor shortages, material shortages, neighbor concerns, land costs, right? We have all of these other problems trying to provide housing, but until the policy is right, there's not anything that we can even begin to address. So we've designed the code to be a curation of codes across the United States that have proven themselves to be really promoting of adaptive and creative incremental development work by Alliance members. We've also designed the code to both be promoting of incremental development and also able to be adopted incrementally, so that it can be pulled even, you know, there are individual modules that can supplement existing codes. There are model zones that can be adopted but not put in place on the map, so that city council, you know, town council is required to put those into a project by project basis, kind of an opt-in incremental development zone. We also have done some model codes that then can be PUDs or PZDs for specific neighborhoods, kind of overlays to a specific area. The code can also then fully replace your existing zoning code, but leave the map in place. We do always say asterisk, that does really carry the risk of carrying over that exclusionary zoning and the impacts of that from the original zoning. So the full project of replacing any zoning code in any place is also really that new zoning map, which should function no matter how you're redoing your zoning code. Your new zoning map really needs to function as your growth plan, that you are coordinating with your infrastructure, often water, sewer, transit, right? You're coordinating with where can you support new density? Where are those locations that new density is actually beneficial to fulfill capacity that you're already paying for? Where are your sensitive lands, sensitive soils that you need to be keeping development off of? The zoning codes really can be that growth plan and that growth direction to putting units where you need them and where you can serve them. So once you get your policy fixed, one of the ideas that we like to talk about in terms of how we really should be thinking about housing is that we're really just splitting up resources. Housing has been sold only, you know, it's like sugar sold only in 10-pound bags. And if you don't need 10 pounds of sugar, you either end up not able to afford the sugar at all because you can't afford all 10 pounds, or you end up with a whole bunch of extra sugar. So we really try to promote to, you know, as we're talking through all the variances we often need with cities, we try to tell them that we're just splitting the sugar up into smaller bags. So that's the idea on this project. Instead of building the by right 3,000, you know, square foot 4-bedroom house that would have been worth at the time these were built $600,000, now probably double that. We split instead that square footage up and the land cost up into 4 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom cottages. So these were fee simple. They were able to be financed by buyers with a 30-year mortgage, and we sold them for $150,000 each, which even now for us 5 years later seems incredibly affordable. It was the cheapest house you could buy downtown in years, although that price per square foot relative to everything else in town was insane. But that's how splitting up resource math works too, right? We split up the purchase price to fit the single person households who otherwise were priced totally out of the market. So with the same developer partner, we did this set of stealth fourplexes. So each one of these buildings, and I'll show you in a site plan in a second, is a townhouse turned with a long side towards the street. It's an 18 by 32 module. So there are 4 of them going deep on the site. So we're seeing the long end, and then from a massing standpoint, they look like historic American 4 squares. And so this really assisted too in building a housing type that seems from a density standpoint to be really unapproachable by most cities. These work out at 30 to 40 dwelling units per acre, but the massing and height of them feels like a single family house. And one of the things that I think has also been really tricky as we talk about opening up housing diversity is that single family homes can still be built virtually everywhere. Right? Just because other housing formats become legal to build doesn't mean that we're making large single family homes illegal. We're just trying to open up the market to provide other forms of housing too. And it's probably smaller ones on smaller lots. So here's the site plan for that one. This is 2 traditional 50 by 150 Lots, which is our standard lot size in town. They are alley loaded, so there is adequate parking in the rear, even to meet our parking code as is. And I think that this one got tucked back in because this time it came with a site plan. And a corner lot did make this one possible. So again, this is our 4 1-bedroom. We call this our mini house. And we've built these mini houses a number of times, both as fee simple homes, as townhouses, as ADUs. We've even built them in a cottage court format once. And this is a direct translation of, again, kind of that idea of square footage split to meet demographic needs. We designed these really in mind for seniors. It's right across the street from a large city park and our senior center, a large community garden. And they were designed to be age in place with, you know, roll-in showers and full ADA clearances on everything. And 3 of our 4 buyers were actually single millennials. So I think too, as we think about these housing demographics, we're often going to be surprised by the number of people that this housing type can be really appealing to. So one last example. This one is a project that I have been developing myself since 2016. The last 2 projects were completed for developer clients, but this one is 1 to 3 bedroom houses. They range from 520 square feet up to 1,900 square feet. And each one is platted fee simple single family home lots, but they're very, very small lots. So the zoning type in our town that was required to do this, I could build a 7-story building in. And I think that's one thing that you really have to think about as you are targeting code changes, is single family, even detached housing that's on really small lots often is very hard to build for a number of reasons. But these street facing lots were built first, and they're an average of 30 feet by 80 feet with a rear alley. And so that puts our overall neighborhood density at about 15 units per acre for the single family. And when we incorporate the townhouses in the back, we're at about 26 units per acre. And it feels very neighborhood friendly, right? So we've tucked our density. We've got a series of townhouses arranged around a courtyard in the back that is a phase that is yet to be built due to a variety of not great construction trends that you're all aware of in the last 3 years. And we got more separation and more gardens up front. And one of the important things that I've learned about building small houses is that you can't just downsize everything slightly. You have to be incredibly space efficient in some places. Note that dining room nook that tucks out onto the front porch in lieu of a freestanding dining room table in this case. And that allows for normal size of furniture and normal size appliances. You have to include a few really special details in each house. Although many of the materials that we use consistently across all the houses, things like sand in place, utility grade oak floors, 1-inch white hex tiles, simple quartz countertops. My favorite $300 Home Depot flush glazed front doors, which I'm convinced they sell as a loft leader. You have to build these in groups also, right? You have to sell the idea to your contractors that it's the same amount of square feet as the 5,000 square foot custom home that you're competing with for their time. It's just under 3 different rooftops. And so that consistency and scale is something to really be aware of as we talk about infill, right? People building individual cottages in their backyard is incredibly expensive and incredibly difficult to get contractors consistently to come out. And often those ADUs are being developed by amateurs, someone who has never developed something before. So we have to build things in place that's really recognizing that extra challenge that we're giving them when we can't be building multiple houses together, multiple small houses together to really be able to compete for that contractor market. One benefit of being both the architect and the developer is also that I can maximize the ability to fully design every detail. So the architecture, the gardens, the site, the interiors are all very intentionally designed for constructability, marketability, and finance underwriting. Here's a fun example of that. We found an incredible efficiency and economic advantage to garage apartments on these small lots. A dedicated uncovered parking space off the alley in the fire setback on the property line leads to the smallest unit in the neighborhood. So the front house is the largest 2-bedroom that we've done. It's got really nice large rooms, great storage, a powder room, and it's an empty nester couple that's rented this main unit for the last 5 years. And the garage apartment has had a more steady cast of 1 year of lease renters. So it's our entry point, price point entry to the neighborhood here. But one of the things that we learned working with the underwriters on the loans here is that we didn't have comps for detached ADUs when these were first being sold. And if the ADU doesn't have to go outside to go back inside, then it can be financed and considered as part of the overall house square footage. So this was able to be viewed by a bank either as a duplex or as a really large single family home that happened to have 2 kitchens, whichever one comps worked better on. So that kind of flexibility in financing has been really helpful. And all that it took to incorporate that was the single door that accesses between the garage and the stair. We didn't even have to go all the way through conditioned space, just making the garage accessible to both the apartment and to the house and getting some creative lock solutions on that. Let that finance work. So let's look at some local inspiration too. I got some really great photos and then enjoyed some Google Street Views here of running through. One of the things that we really recommend is picking that architectural language with care. There are certain details, right, that being able to take your carpenters and go and look at them and say, this is the way that I want this, not only leads to that local character, but it also makes things significantly more constructible because you've got full-size, full-scale models. There are a lot of these details that can be challenging to recreate, but less so than you think if you really get into the catalogs of trim and start to think about these as that architectural quality and character in a traditional format neighborhood. You really only have a small portion of the front of the house that's visible, that needs all of this architectural detail, right? We want to put people and the architectural detail, all of our attention up front. We want to create a place along the street for people to sit. And then we want to put all of the, plain building materials, plainer trim, cars, trash, utility meters in the back anytime that's possible. So one thing to really think about that's a pro to more dense housing is that you also have fewer square feet of frontage that needs this much architectural detail. So I really encourage you too, as you're working through, to take the lines of your own traditional vernacular housing and bring those details and materials forward into new construction. So a couple other ideas that we've been talking through with communities. One of the ones that I am currently a big fan of, even though it scares everybody, it's a change to your policies, often your family definition or your SRO policies, that you could make tomorrow, right? It often doesn't even require construction to units themselves to begin to legalize alternative household structures. So in neighborhoods that we do have some of those big historic existing houses that we saw a second ago, we can also split up those costs and work required to maintain them by allowing non-traditional, non-family household arrangements that your zoning code might not currently allow. So the name for this that we've really leaned into, pulling this from Cape Cod's code, is congregate housing. And there is some reflection in the IBC of this too, but the image that we really have leaned into in thinking about this, right, is the Golden Girls, the original congregate housing crew. And also for the majority of single person households who are women over 55, this can also be a really cost-effective, resource sufficient, and very evening cocktail promoting social improvement on living alone. Women of younger ages are also finding this really appealing, right? So we've had a number of articles come out about women kind of banding together, raising kids in really non-traditional households. The family structure and parental involvement and sibling involvement in raising kids has become really challenging. And so the more that we can begin to legalize housing for everybody at all phases of their life, the more able people are to live their lives in ways that are supportive and create very little nuisance, right? No more nuisance than if they had 5 kids themselves living in this house. They just happen to have 2 moms who are taking care of them both. I think in this article, it's actually 3 single moms who live together to split the housing costs and also childcare costs. So accessory dwelling units have gotten so much press in the last few years, which we both love, and also they can take a lot of forms. And so most ADUs are versions of ways that Americans have always modified their houses for more flexibility and income. Before single family zoning, it was incredibly common to add a garage apartment for your son when he was starting his first job and he wanted some more independence, or for your mom who needed a little bit more support. It was normal to cut up a big house into apartments or to take in boarders to share housing costs. This normal housing use has needed to be codified recently for a few reasons. So we can't afford housing. We've intentionally made housing unaffordable, and we now can no longer afford housing. And so one of the things that is really critical to think about in terms of ADUs is that they're only a useful hack if you haven't been able to eliminate single family zoning. If you can build multiple units by right on residential lots, townhouses are often a significantly more land efficient and resource efficient way to build small units. Small walk-up apartments, other than their fire sprinklers, are another one. So ADUs are really beneficial, and also they have a lot of surface area relative to their volume. With fire code setbacks, we lose a lot in density, with small cottages. So they're a tool in the tool belt, and I also don't want you guys to think about them as the only tool that really works. Oops. So the thing that we really want to think about is not just single family infill. That means not just more single family houses that are smaller and tighter together, right? We've really got to get creative on this. So here is a California apartment building. It's been here since 1927. It's 4 one-bedroom apartments. They're very cute inside. And I wanted to include some density numbers on this too, so that as we start to think about why we don't want to limit density of housing based on units per acre, I want to give you some examples of the ways that these densities can look, right? So this is 27 units per acre. It has parking in the rear. And we require really 12 units per acre as a baseline minimum to be able to support walkable commercial and support transit. And so these kinds of buildings are found in every historic neighborhood that we've worked in America, right? We always find these little walk-ups, 2 to 6 apartments, sometimes 8 or 12, but in house massing and detailing that feels like residential uses. It feels like a big mansion from a scale standpoint, right? Sometimes we'll see a 3-story, 2.5-story really is that maximum height. The detailing is very residential. Often the number of meters in the back is the only way that you can tell that this is a small apartment building. This one does not have parking on the lot, so it's on an even smaller lot. So this one gets up to 40 units per acre. This is also 4 apartments, 2 upstairs, 2 downstairs. The apartments are a little bit larger. But again, this is a really, really normal building type prior to zoning code. And so it's something that as we start to think about multifamily, I want you guys to think about multifamily as still being able to be really residential, still be very approachable and friendly, and be a much more efficient way to provide housing, again, other than those fire sprinklers, at a density that really makes sense from a land cost standpoint, from a construction complexity standpoint, and from a housing, matching that housing cost to the household size standpoint. This one is the most intense that I've found. This is actually in Fayetteville. I used to live right around the corner from this. So it is 13 one-bedroom apartments and also this little shop front that's connected. And so I include a site plan on this to show people how this works. It's a 2-story brick building. The commercial is, so it's a mixed-use project, but it's horizontally mixed use. Little simple brick rectangle that has always been rented the whole time I've lived here, and these apartments are never available. They put a handwritten sign on the front door when one of them comes up, and it's gone within a couple of days. So without parking, right, and allowing a little bit of this small scale, very residentially detailed, very friendly and approachable multifamily, this is almost 70 units per acre. Right. And this is a workhorse building that has been here since the 1930s. How many years of really affordable housing have we gotten out of this very traditional, very historic form of housing? And so again, let's illustrate and talk through those numbers. This is kind of one of the last things that we'll run through. And these are 2018 math. So, you have a little scale. These also were done for Georgia. But, this idea of the only thing that we have legal is a duplex even, which is considered, relatively dense for some of the places that we work. Here's our kind of cost per unit for sale. As we start to split up that bag of sugar, we start to get down to more approachable price points, right? Our rents come down and our house costs come down. As we see these large single family homes, right, that single unit, even adding in just a duplex, new construction is our most expensive form of housing. So we've really got to be able to maximize its impact and split it up among as many people as possible. So in this math, right, these units end up being almost $800,000 each. And it's always hard to do this math and put that on paper. And it feels crazy a lot of times thinking about, right, these duplex units costing what many of us 10 years ago would have paid for a decent house on its own lot. And yet here we are splitting up into quadplexes and then again into sixplexes. We can start to bring those numbers down to something that is often much more approachable, especially for workforce housing, and the majority of our households. So I'm here for questions, but I always like to end with this gut punch. This is a standard slide from Ink Dutch training courses, and it's a reminder that no one but you is going to care as much about your place or know as much about it and what it needs as you are. And so I always like to say it's really lucky to have a room full of people who care deeply about housing, who are working together to try to solve these problems. So let's jump right in with questions as we go.
Actually, if I could, is Kevin still back there? You said you're leaving at 7:45, so we'll let you go first. And you might want to walk up front to make sure you're heard the speaker.
And camera gets you.
Yeah, too.
No pressure.
Alli, the first question will be the Petaluma mayor. So,
Thanks. A lot of this is not California specific. It doesn't include our Prop 13. It doesn't include our SB 9. It doesn't include many of the other things the state has figured out to mandate on local communities. So I wanted to know from our group, really, what governmental constraints are still there? And is this more a question of encouraging developers into this market, and what brings them into the market if there's no governmental constraint?
if I could just add a little bit, Alli, before you respond, Kevin made a reference to SB 9, Senate Bill 9. It allows any single family lot to be subdivided into two with an ADU on each of the two lots. So basically you can convert one home into four by right. And yet that's been the law of the land for perhaps 2 years. I don't know if there's been a single project like that done in Petaluma. So effectively the mayor's asking why not, how do we get there?
I think that one of the things that we often point to California, right, as an example of being really familiar with these, right? An example of single family zoning has in some ways been eliminated, and the fact that we aren't seeing a lot of projects is a sign that we do still have a lot of constraints, right? We've removed one, which is it doesn't just have to be a single family home, but in many cases, it does still have to be detached units. We often then are required to infill in neighborhoods that aren't necessarily set up or geared for that kind of infill, right? We don't necessarily have backyards and alleys that we can come in. We can put units pretty efficiently along the back. Tucking a unit and building a unit in an actual backyard is, from a construction standpoint, an absolute nightmare. We're hand carrying all of the materials to the back, right? It's hard to get equipment back there. The neighbors are miserable. Getting the setbacks right is really challenging. We're often losing some backyard space. And so the ways that we often see this density happening is cutting up existing houses, right? And I'm not saying that these changes aren't good. I'm not saying that these changes aren't an enormous necessary step. I'm saying that with a lot of these changes, what we're seeing is they're not having an impact for relatively practical reasons. And so the more that we start to recognize all of those secondary things that cities are still legislating, right, in terms of impact fees, in terms of the way that permits are given. One of the things that we often find a struggle with is there's often not a good alignment to comp plans and infrastructure investment with the places that cities actually want to see density happen. And so that mapping of rezoning is as important as the rezoning abilities itself. Even the thing that we found as we're writing this new zoning code is that those early tiers are almost impossible to write in a way that incorporates every single little, what we would call poison pill, that's tucked into the code, right? So until we really think about a code holistically, and often until someone has worked in it for a number of years, it can be challenging to find every single little nugget that's tucked in there. And so that is why cities often are finding a full zoning code rewrite to be necessary, because we've got a zoning code that often has been written over the last 60 years with only one side of the pencil. We're never removing little statutes. We're only ever adding them. And so we get this really convoluted book that at the end of the day, if a project wants to not happen, you can find something in the code that makes it illegal. And so until you start to really shift to policies, both from a legal ordinance standpoint and from a staff standpoint, that you have a staff that is fully aligned and fully knowledgeable about the kind of housing that you want to see and how to get to yes, and that they have that mindset that their success is getting to yes and getting to housing units being built, and not feeling like every project has to be perfect. Because as you look through really beautiful, beloved neighborhoods, if you start to nitpick on every house, you'll find a lot of really goofy things. And so getting the streetscape right, getting the massing right, getting your architectural detailing on the front right, getting the parking not, the most obvious thing, providing a lot less parking than you think that you need. Those kinds of elements often can help people get over that hump. But I think what we found, working nationwide and working really deeply in this one place, is that the kind of depth of that zoning code really holds a number of challenges. And often we find those to be surprising. So I'm going to give you one really silly example. So our townhouses in our city's zoning code, in the definition section, there's one line in the definition section that says townhouses are considered the number of dwelling units that are attached. And the way that it's worded, I don't even know that it's how they meant it, but the way that it's legislated is that if you have 2 townhouses that are attached, that's considered a duplex. If you have 6 townhouses attached, that's considered multifamily. And so townhouses are incredibly difficult to build here unless you're in a really permissive zone that allows way more things than most residents are even comfortable with. And so starting to get into the specific code, it really is 2-part. It's policy-based, that you have to be legislating and not just allowing, but actively encouraging and working every day to figure out how to make them happen. All of these forms of housing, we have to have the whole menu available. And then you really have to have that staff and that city operation that is fully committed, fully aligned, and you have their back. That they know that their charge is to provide housing and to get people, housed in dignified, safe, and affordable ways. And that they have some leeway to be creative about what that takes. That sometimes there'll be some code statute that like, okay, we're 1 foot short here. And if this was allowed to be 1 or 2 feet, flexibility, we could get another unit in. And as people start to really have that mentality of working together to achieve that, you may start to see some of those changes. But just ADUs as a means of, we often hear, oh, well, we can double our density or we can triple our density. In this case, we can quadruple our density. But if your baseline density was 4 units per acre, then even if your entire neighborhood, everybody in the neighborhood split their lot into 2 and put 2 units in the back, we're still at 16 units an acre, which is you guys start to see from kind of these examples of more historic projects is still really low. And the lift that would be required to redevelop entire neighborhoods by adding a second house and then by adding two apartments in the back, just from a practical standpoint, is so much work for a community and for individual homeowners. So it's such an important step, and there's so many more things that I think that we can do also, and we're going to have to do to house the population that we have.
Thank you.
Very clear.
I have just a quick, simple one. The numbers that you're giving for neighborhood density seem really, really high given the pictures I saw. Does that density calculation include the street area?
It does. It includes street areas to center line.
Wow.
And that's one thing. So if there's one book that I can recommend, I think I actually have a copy behind me somewhere. It's called Visualizing Density. And it's written by a pilot who took aerial photos of these and by a landscape architect. And it includes aerial photos of neighborhoods and then measurements of their densities. And it is incredible to see the wide variety of this density per acre. And so it's written by Julie Campoli and Alex McLean, and it's called Visualizing Density. It's one of my favorite new books. And it really starts to show that a city like Paris, right, which is never over 5 stories, a city like DC, which again is never over 3 to 5 stories, is often 90 units an acre baseline. And so we're so used to single family home densities that 8 units an acre feels crazy. And that as we look at traditional towns, right, even small towns like in the middle of America, right, with their little main streets, often we're looking at apartments and garage apartments and little quadplexes tucked into those historic districts. And often even their historic districts in an average American small town is north of 20 units an acre as we look at, kind of the entire piece. And so I think it's really important to think through and that's one reason I put all those densities in there. Our perception of density is really skewed by a generation of single family home zoning that limits us often across the US at 4 units per acre. And those densities can start to, so limiting density in your code at all in that way can be really hurtful, because often you'll end up, the math then comes down to, okay, so I need this many square feet of lot area to do a unit. And even though you could fit another unit, geometrically meeting all the setbacks, you can't by that zoning cap. And so we often try to encourage both. The more that you can think about very tight rights of way, that's one of the way that some of those zoning densities are so narrow, right? A historic town has a 30 to 50 foot right of way and all of your utilities are inside of it. We did a study recently for a town here that was considering moving all of their utilities outside of the right of way so that they were easier to maintain. And so they wanted a 20-foot easement for utilities on both sides of every street. And so we did some studies with them showing that really you have to think about the land outside of your right of way as your taxable land, right? The only productive land that you have is land outside of your parks, outside of your rights of way. And so as we started to look at those blocks with the existing rights of way that they had, their land was 78%, developable. It was 78% taxable. And as they started to overlay those utility easements, they were cutting down by almost 40% because they had relatively small block sizes. They were cutting down to under 50% productive land area. And so it's really critical to not just think about the housing formats, but to think about this in terms of that whole section, right? If you can get utilities in the right of way, if you can start to get really narrow streets, if you can start to narrow down your street rights of way, you can see incredibly better densities, often slower traffic speeds along those residential streets. We're not obviously going to do this like on every commercial strip everywhere, but most neighborhood streets can and should be much smaller than we tend to think about them being.
If folks online want to raise their hand, I don't want to ignore you, so just use that raise hand feature. Anybody here in the room? Darren?
Just follow everyone else's lead and stand here. Thank you for the presentation. Just two quick questions, really about files and detail. For how much, and you talked about just focus on details on the part facing the street, but or to like Disney World, we're trying to overdo it and make it a period piece when it should be a living piece of modern architecture. Do you have any thoughts there? How much to lean into some of those details? And then if you have rules of thumb on massing, a word that I'm loving recently is called gentle density. I don't know if massing plays into that or some of the tricks to kind of lower the impact on some of these kind of density related projects.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the challenge that we all hit, right? And there are these, that's helpful too. I was worried it was just my audio. I did miss a couple words here, so if my answer is a little skewed, feel free to correct me too. What we really find is that there can be this emphasis on new projects really needing to be perfect and to really need to kind of get every detail right. And that's one thing that we really do push back on, that I think that the proportions need to be right and the materials need to be right. And you really need to be thinking about how something's going to age. But in a lot of cases, a lot of our really beautiful traditional historic architecture is simple. And, we get a couple of really special details. What we call it loss leader design. And so, every phase of houses that we do one really nice thing that would not pencil on that house, but pencils, on the entire development. And so we did a big, beautiful curved front porch, on a street corner. We did a full cedar shingle house, which, has this really nice texture on the end. Right. So thinking about the details as the whole, not every single thing has to be special. Getting the proportions right, getting the massing right, getting, the window kind of fenestration right. Just getting those things that don't actually cost any more sort of correct means that you can spend a lot less, which is the only way that this stuff is working right now. And then, I think too, that as we think through how perfect neighborhoods need to be, that really the streetscape detailing, getting street trees, in right, getting the sidewalks at the right place, having some separation between sidewalk and street, getting those street details right, and getting front porches in, and the first 10 feet of garden off the back of the sidewalk is really the only thing that neighbors are experiencing. And so things can get really plain along the sides and around the back. And that's really that nice natural balance of putting, your best foot forward for the public. And it's sort of like dressing well, right, for people around you. That you're putting forth things as a civic art kind of in the front yard, but that things can be really simple around the back. So I think rules of thumb in terms of massing, we tend to pay a lot of attention to trying to stay under that 30-foot roof eave, which really helps with aerial access, which is the only way we get in all those good street trees. And it's the way we get that density in. And so staying below that 30-foot eave Height means sometimes we'll get to a 2.5-story building. Sometimes we'll have a setback 3rd story, but we really try to keep things at an elevated 2 stories. And that tends to keep things really approachable. It also makes our egress length shorter. And, you know, anytime we've got kind of upstairs units. So I think generally matching the massing of the big grand houses in your historic district can be a really good way to do this, and matching the massing of your downtowns, right? That we sometimes do step up and see those much taller buildings. Height itself is not a problem, and the taller and more imposing it gets, the more critical all that good architectural detailing gets too. The bigger and more imposing the massing is, the better all the detailing has to be too.
I love to hear you talk about street trees. Thank you.
I did a TED talk once about street trees, and I can talk your ear off about it.
Maybe another evening.
Okay, I'm John, City Council. But I have a fun little project. I'm trying to talk my son into working with him that I would finance him to build an ADU or a junior ADU in the garage or in the backyard. And so we're looking at the actual size, whether it be he's lived in tiny houses and yurts. So whether it be 150 square foot, 200 square foot, 250 square foot, what is your experience with these small homes? What is the comfortable for a single person? What is a comfortable size, even with a nice tiny home design and everything? What is a fairly comfortable size for a single person, both young and old? There might be a difference in your opinion, but what size are we kind of looking at for reducing the size, but yet be very comfortable for livability for 5 or 10 years, not feel like you're living in a cage?
You know, I personally love tiny homes as a really great solution to housing. We've proposed them several times because it's the cheapest house that we can get. It's so little, right? We can't do anything like that site built. And it is really tight, and it takes a real personality to be comfortable living in a unit that small, right? It is a life skill to live in a tiny house. One of the things that we have found is that 500 to 600 square foot size gives us enough space for a linen closet and like a place to put the vacuum and normal sized appliances. And so we end up with a really livable 1-bedroom unit, and it's about the size of a 2-car garage also, which works out really nicely. There's a couple of different proportions that replacing a 2-car garage with that about, 500 to 600 square foot unit can get you a very livable 1-bedroom. And one of the ways that we've handled marketing those, we've tested some smaller units than that. They've not really been any cheaper to build, right? If you're working within a constrained existing footprint, that's kind of different. But doing a much smaller new construction ADU, we've not had any success getting it cheaper going smaller than about 500 square feet, because we get into weird appliances and like doors have to be non-standard sizes, and it gets a little funky. And we've also not had a lot of luck building and making any money 700 to about 1,100 square feet. Like it's just big enough that it doesn't feel like a small house, and it feels like it should be bigger, but it's not. And so that 500 to 600 square foot, our mini house size, really successful for us. We've done it above a 2-car garage. We've done it freestanding. We've done it as a townhouse. Like we've done that a lot of units that size, and we market them as tiny homes. And then people, as they're walking through them, they have high ceilings and they have a place to put all your stuff. And the vanity is a normal size. It's not just a pedestal sink. It's really livable. And so that marketing and expectation that it's a tiny house also helps. But again, that 700 to 1,100 is really challenging for us. And then 11 to 1,500 is, a larger unit that is really easy and livable. And so one thing that I don't know is Petaluma's, a definition of ADU size. But one of the things that we did in Fayetteville was define an ADU size as a 1,200 square foot maximum size unit. And the reason that we did that is that's the size of a 2-car garage with an apartment upstairs. And so that's a really common ADU type historically in our town. And so we know that it's fine. The massing of a 2-story, a 2nd story above a 2-car garage detached, nobody is bothered by it all. And so we allow the ground floor to also be used to house people instead of cars. And so thinking too about that, that could be 2 600 square foot apartments. That could be one larger house that often even can have kids in it, can have roommates in it. Those are the sizes of small units that we find most useful.
Okay, thank you.
Still no hands online. Who else here? I saw some hands earlier. Bill. Thank you.
Bill Wolpert. I'm an architect, and when we see housing developers come to town, they tell us that, that 2,400 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house is what the market wants. And I guess after seeing your slides on where the need really is, what market are they talking about? Perhaps it's the financing people. Maybe it's something other than the home buyer that's interested in how many bedrooms the house has. Interested in your comment.
I work mostly with and for developers, and they are, a crazy crew to wrangle on a day-to-day basis. This is information I talk to them about all the time, and most of them are really surprised by it. And one of the things that we really struggle with is a lot of them have really successful businesses that are based on selling a really specific product. And if you've made a whole lot of money selling roast beef sandwiches, then it feels really scary to start selling mini quiches. And it's a totally different product. You don't really understand it. Your marketing is not set up for this. Like none of your pricing models are around this. And even if the quiches are going to make you a lot more money, shifting that business model is hard and scary for big, often multi-generational companies. And so we often lead developer companies kind of through that transition. And often I think the approach can be encouraging them to try some smaller units. That's often the way that we do it. Right? We try to like gateway drug them into, okay, but like, what if we just had like 5 really cute, just, we'll just test them. We'll just see what happens. And it's always the units that sell the fastest, right? It's always the units that sell the easiest. They aren't often as profitable. They are just as hard to build. This is the thing that I do think we should give developers credit for as we're trying to figure out ways to incentivize them to build something that is more useful. It's just as much work to build a 500 square foot house as it is to build a 2,400 square foot house, and it's worth how many times less? So you have to build more of them and sell more of them in order to make the same profit. And so there's more risk in that. And that can be scary in a reasonable way for somebody who is trying to stay in business. And so the thing that is really critical is allowing them to get as many of those houses as possible in a way that still makes great streetscapes and everybody still likes and is still detailed well. But that we have to recognize that we're asking them to do something very different than the thing that they have been successful doing. And so even if they're not as successful as they could be, they still know how to do it. And we also have to sort of gateway drug them into it. In my experience, we've tried a lot of different methods, and that's the one that works the best. And almost every time, almost all of our clients are repeat clients, because once they've done one neighborhood like that has smaller lots, the infrastructure is tighter, so their infrastructure numbers, it's much more affordable to build the infrastructure in the neighborhood. They're getting much better density. They're selling the units much more quickly, and they're not the biggest thing here, I think, too, to convince them of is you're also not competing against every other developer in town, because you're selling a product that is really highly in demand and no one else is selling. And so that's really been, I think, the kind of multi-pronged approach to trying to convince people to change something that they feel like isn't broken, because they can still sell a house. And they don't realize it's because we so desperately need houses that people would buy literally anything.
That's great. Thank you.
I have another analogy that I often use. I don't know you guys well enough to give it because it involves some cursing. So I gave you the clean version, but it was hard.
You can use the other one if you want. Go ahead.
Instead of roast beef sandwiches, right? The analogy is often, it's like if you have a business that has always sold shit sandwiches, and the only thing that's available for everybody is shit sandwiches, and you can eat it or starve. You're going to be shocked to find that people actually prefer things other than shit sandwiches.
Good luck following that.
No, my question was when I grow up.
Chris.
Real banal question.
Cost per square foot, you're a developer and an architect.
Mhm.
You're in Arkansas. What are your projects coming in cost per square foot without land? Because that's probably the huge difference between California and Arkansas.
Absolutely. And that's a labor and that's a legal difference too. So we started out, well, I'm in Northwest Arkansas, which is one of the top 10 fastest growing places in America. So relative to the rest of Arkansas, even our costs are considered insane. And our housing costs have increased 120% in the last 10 years. So we have really affordable housing relative to you. And I know that because almost everyone who buys a house that I build is from California. And so I hear from them a lot about how affordable houses are. They're like, I'll take two. It's great. So 5 years ago, pre-COVID in the before times, we would build something for $115 to $150 a square foot, depending on how nice it was and how small it was. And we would sell it for $165 to $230 a square foot, depending on how small it was and how nice it was. And, pretty rapidly over the last 5 years, we're now building things for, if we can get something built for under $230 a square foot, we are like high-fiving. And it's selling for $350 to $400 a square foot. And so, even really little units, I quoted to somebody earlier today what I thought one of those townhouses, the little stealth fourplexes that are little 4 townhouses together. I guessed what I thought that it had sold for, and then I looked it up on Zillow, and it was like 60% higher than I would have guessed. And some of that is we, like most markets, are just experiencing that housing crisis of there is so much more demand than there is supply that we cannot keep up with the demand. And there are enough people with money that they can just pay what is required to get the house.
So just as an example to compare, just today, I got the price for an ADU that we designed in Marin. It's 750 square feet. We designed it as simple as we could. It's for an 85-year-old who's lived in the main house and his son is buying the main house. He's going to move to the ADU. We only got one price on it. We didn't do competitive bidding, but it came in at $900 a square foot.
We have some buildings here that come in like that too. We occasionally see, and especially architect design things, right? We all struggle with this more than the average bear. We see stuff in our market that's priced $600, $800 a square foot for construction. If it's something custom like that, it happens. It's not as bad as you guys, right? We definitely have some easier paths here. And this is the other reason that ADUs are a solution. We need ADUs in the toolkit. We cannot house our population wholly in new construction, detached single family houses that are just smaller. It's not the only solution that's going to work. And it's not too, if we look at historic cities and historic populations and, cities in other continents, it's not the pattern of development that humans have ever lived in efficiently. And so it is a really important tool, and it cannot be considered the only tool in the tool belt, or we're just going to stay in this mess.
Nice. Anybody else here in this room? Well, there's got to be more questions. Bill, go for it.
Okay, this is another banal question. I hate to ask it, but we really need a great answer. Love your project character and the building types, but I noticed that all of the floors are above street elevation and don't have accessible front doors. And I think that's important, but are they adaptable with lifts, or what's your approach to accessibility in multifamily projects like that?
Most of the projects that you were seeing are in Fayetteville, and we have an average normal city topography of about 15% grade. So from the front to the back of those 80-foot units, there's about a 5-foot drop from the alley to the sidewalk. So they're relatively close to grade in the back, but the fronts end up really elevated, and that's really normal for us. And so, the balance of that is in rectangular lots, if the short side is where your infrastructure is and where people are, then you need a lot less nice stuff than if you turn it with the slope. And so we often end up with pretty elevated units. One of the things, though, that I think is important to keep in mind, the mini houses were done, the parking is on the uphill side, which is the opposite of the way where you would have put it from a site planning standpoint, but that let us put the parking at the high side of the house so that you can go from, parking space or from sidewalk right into front door. So those are done to be adaptable. But often we do have stairs to front porches, and often from an urban pattern, it feels more comfortable to have your porch elevated slightly from the street. You're more likely to sit on it if it's slightly elevated, it has a railing, because there's a little bit of a feeling of threshold. So one of the things that we've really tried to adapt is how do we put the parking, how do we have a door to the house that's really accessible? And how is parking near that one? And it doesn't always work. But I think that the other thing that we need to keep in mind is even for age in place, the things that often price people out of, force people out of their housing that they like in neighborhoods that they like, is not just their ability to get up and down stairs to the front door. Often mobility is not the only thing that's limiting. Often the maintenance and feeling of safety and feeling of community can be the things that put people into more of a kind of nursing home setting, that they feel like they need to move out of their house. Two-story houses for sure are more of a challenge. We also, from a foundation standpoint and from a land cost standpoint, have a very hard time building one-story houses. And so one thing that we really tried to approach is that we're doing a percentage of our units that are accessible inside, accessible at the door. But that the vast majority of our challenge is also just housing people at all. And so the more that we can start to add the second story, add the garage above the apartment above the garage that is not going to be accessible, the more that we can start to tuck in that volume of housing, the more that we are getting accessible units tucked in. And there's only a very small part of the percentage of the population that needs those units at any given time. So making sure that we've got resources provided, and then also a focus on, resources aligned, that the people who need those houses are able to find them, but not limiting housing, because that specific unit can't be built to be accessible.
I'm still seeing no questions from online. Are you people really that reticent? Come on, somebody raise a hand out there. Not seeing anything. Any more questions in this room? Oh, come on.
I know the Zoom crew is quiet tonight. We got cameras off. We got no questions. The chat box is quiet.
So we have Omira asking more about the street trees.
Oh, okay. One of the things that I think is most important in terms of streets is the street trees, in terms of comfort, in terms of temperature mitigation, in terms of feeling of safety for pedestrians. And the thing that is critical for street trees is not just species selection, but it's also making sure that your trees have enough room. And so kind of, high points, right, of the things to do to make this work. You have to figure out your street section so that you don't have utilities underneath the street trees. The cheapest thing in that street section, 15 years down the line, which is about how long it's going to be before you need to work on anything, is the sidewalk and the street pavement, right? And so if your water and sewer are both underneath your street, your sewer line is the thing that's going to get worked on the least. Your water line is the thing that's going to get worked on the most. We usually do electric under one sidewalk, and then we do our franchise utilities, gas, cable, et cetera, under our other sidewalk. We tend to do a buried power situation. We tend to have all buried utilities. All of that can be provided in a 45-foot street section, even with sidewalks and street trees on both sides. 4-foot width, continuous tree well is your ideal minimum. 5 to 6 feet is better if you can get it in between back of curb and the sidewalk. There's all sorts of really expensive, crazy details about how to plant street trees, and almost all of them are a bad idea. Trees in your region grow in the dirt of your region. And so there's some really good studies. James Urban is a fabulous leading expert on urban tree plantings. His last name is Urban, which is one of those really satisfying. He really found his calling. Where he works with the Bartlett Tree Farms. They've done test plots of the same, clones of street trees planted in different soils and in different planting environments within the same field. And so they can get really good multi-year studies of growth, of survival, of canopy volume. And so the thing that we have found the most success about is really just planting street trees in continuous soil wells, Ideally, you have the same species tree in that tree well. So trees like growing with continuous connected root systems of trees of the same species. So you want to get biodiversity by changing block by block, right? So this block could be all Shumard oak. This block could be, you know, all black tupelo. But keeping continuous soil volumes with connected root zones with uncompacted native topsoil, and like, don't get tricky. Don't do structured soil, don't do silvacells, don't do tree grapes, don't spend all your money on that. Build, you know, buy good trees, water them, and take really good care of them the first year so that they get really well established. Use natives. Give them enough space, but keep otherwise the planting detail really simple. And I'll, as we answer a question, I've got a fun graphic that we did that cross compares some street trees in our town that we planted under those details relative to the city standard detail, which is a structural soil with a tree grate. And then what trees that are the same species look like. They were planted the same year, they're the same species, they're a couple blocks away in those two details, what they look like across the years. I'll pull it up and screen share really quick.
Cool.
And it looks like zoning code updates. Tell me a little bit then about your general plan update. We've got a question in the chat that says, early on we talked about zoning. How hard was it to get codes updated? And any advice for Petaluma that you're going through a general plan update? Tell me more about how the general plan update is going.
I guess that comes to me, doesn't it? There's two GPAT members in the room at least. It's been slow. It is probably, the deadline has already gone out a year from where it was originally targeted to be. Pandemic part of it, we're mostly on Zoom, which has made it harder for the General Plan Advisory Committee to build relationships. But we're making progress. We're starting to see a few drafts of the sections. One of the really interesting challenges coming up is the city has committed to having a complete redo of the zoning code ready to be adopted by the city council at the same meeting when they adopt the general plan. That is going to be a major push over the next 15 months if we're going to actually meet that deadline. So I don't know if that's enough information, but let's say it's pushing a boulder up a hill right now, but we're trying.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I mean, I think that the thing that we see in the communities that are able to successfully pass their zoning codes is a lot of aligned effort, right? So the politics being right is as important as anything else. But I think too, that just the communication and strategy of how you are shaping your own growth and how you're also shaping your own fiscal solvency, that there are a lot of these decisions that I'm going to give you an example of a project we're working on. We're doing a study in a city that had a sewer plant expansion that was sort of forced on them. They don't own the plant, but they're 90% of its capacity. The plant decided, they voted, you know, to expand it at a cost of $75 million, justifying it on this town's future growth, that they thought that they were going to grow and that they were going to need this extra capacity. We started looking through and helping them do some analysis that with their current zoning, this plant is only half. So the city has a ridge line in the middle and this plant only drains half the city. In the half of the city that drains to that plant, it's not even legal to add enough households to use the capacity that's it's a $75 million expansion in a 40,000 person town. Like the math on that does not work at all unless you have all these new Californians buying houses that then, you know, are using this plant capacity. And so we are really trying to help them target that. How do we align our growth and our zoning intentionally to not just the households that we need? How many households do we need divided by our current city area? That's the minimum density that we can do in order to meet our current need. What is it? What's our projection on, you know, our population 20, 30 years from now? Okay, what's that divided by our current city area? That's the minimum zoning we really should have legal, because it's going to take that long, each individual project, to really start to infill the city. How are we making sure that we've got the highest density zones, not just in a concentric ring out from the downtown, but placed in the areas that we can get water and sewer, that this, you know, that the topography works, that the soil works, that the transit works. How are we using zoning really intentionally? And I think that starts to move away from this argument about whether or not multifamily housing is good. And it starts to get to, our city has to stay solvent. And if we don't have enough houses to put people in, that's problem one. And if we don't have enough tax revenue to pay for our infrastructure replacement costs, then we aren't going to have a town anymore. And so I think the more that we've seen people lean into the economics of it and lean out of the philosophy of whether or not single family homes are good or people like them, we've seen a lot of success in that. We also have heard a cool idea. I haven't done this yet, but I think it's the best idea I've heard. Houston allows neighborhoods to do what I'm going to call an exclusion zone. So if 75% of your neighborhood signs a petition and is willing to pay higher taxes, then you can exclude yourselves from an upzoning, but you have to redo it every 5 years. So it allows the neighborhoods that would be the most vehement opponents to the entire city getting a good general plan to step out of it. You can get that first effort done. And in 5 years, if they feel that strongly about it again, like, okay, we're delaying their neighborhoods getting improved, but we're not holding up everybody on those couple of neighborhoods that are going to be a total opponent to anything that you do.
If I could jump back to the general plan question for a moment, and this is a commercial, if I could. As we are moving toward writing the elements of the general plan, we are getting back into looking for more community input. The folks here tonight, Live Explore Realty, have been doing a tactical urbanism event out in front of their building every week for the last 3 weeks, and this will be 4th week on Friday. Without city approval, they're taking over 5 parking places, chalking in pickleball, and letting people play. The mayor came by the first week and said, "Do you have city permission for that?" And we said, "No." He said, "Good." You never would have gotten it. So it's that kind of thing. But what the GPAC is going to do, we're going to call it GPAC, is try to bring one of the elements of the general plan to each one of these tactical urbanism events and have a conversation on the sidewalk. This Friday, there will be a conversation about what you want to see in the general plan on mobility. I'm going to hopefully get land use here next week. So this will be a good chance for you to interact with the people who sit on the GPAC, give them feedback so your ideas can be recognized. So.
I love it.
Didn't mean to interrupt, but we're back to your street tree pictures.
No, I love it. And I think that is the kind of really locally driven grassroots, right? Piracy is the way that I tag that, which is my favorite. I love hearing about this. That's the kind of energy that you need to really pull people together to get this done. One of my early claim to fame was I did some tactical urbanism work, and I also on that South Street development that you guys saw, when I first bought that, I rezoned it from a relatively not dense zone into I could build a 7-story building. And I did that by it was covered in invasive species, and we had a herd of goats come, and we had the goats on the site for like 6 months, and the goat herder had plans of our project, and she just talked to everybody who walked by, and she's really friendly, and people come and see the goats. And then we did a pop-up petting zoo where we had the baby goats come, and we gave out popsicles, and we talked about our, the plans for the neighborhood, and we got input and feedback, and we took that rezoning through, and the city planner thought that we were nuts to ask for what we were asking for, and like not one neighbor came out, because they knew from the goats, they knew what the plan was. So I think a lot of times there is that like silly thing that is connecting people to people can help you get over the hump on what otherwise can feel like really dry and, scary kind of big changes. So we just threw this together to prove to our city engineer why we shouldn't have to do tree grates and structured soil was the point of this. Pettiness is the reason that this exhibit exists. But so the images on the top are a big, city. The mayor was at the ribbon cutting kind of project along one of our main strips. More than half of the trees have died and been replaced. That's one reason that they are so small. They're irrigated and our trees aren't on the bottom. And the ones on the bottom all have connected soil wells. It's all the same species along a block, planted in uncompacted native topsoil. Don't even screen it, right? Don't feel like it has to be like perfect planting soil. Just use the dirt from your place. And then often we're also trying to provide route paths. So in a place that we do get down into that more like 4 foot wide, we'll just do channels of gravel underneath the sidewalk. So, you know, 6 inches by 6 inches, 8 inches by 8 inches. Do a filter rock that's relatively loose and uncompacted so that trees can also be sending roots into the yards on the other side of the sidewalk, which they'll naturally do. But if they can do it that first couple of years, which is when they're most likely to die, their survival rate goes way up. And so you can see what big, pretty trees you can get along a street, which completely changes it, you know, for people.
John?
Okay, basically 2 questions. You answer either one first or second.
Okay.
But since you have multifamily units that look like a single house, you have individual space inside the house, but outside the house is all shared. The roof is shared, the porch is shared, the landscape is shared. So how do you organize the people to work together? Do you have someone that this comes in and maintains and manages all that for them? Or do you have some arrangements that work in getting the folks that live there now to, how do they share and make that all work? And the second question would be just on mobility, because I'm also working on micro mobility and transport issues. And if there's not much parking around, are people really willing in your area to actually move into biking and buses and micro transit of various types? So both just the shared space around the house, and then the mobility, once they leave the house, are they still using their cars or are they shifting their mobilities?
First question is, we often end up doing, if an owner is not building and keeping all of the units for rent, which is a lot of the, you know, projects that we see, then our next kind of goal, if we're splitting up the units and they're being sold, we're often setting lot lines, and we're sometimes using maintenance easements. And so one of the things that we did on the South Street project is, I can pull up that site plan quickly. The property lines are offset 5 feet off of the sidewalls of the houses, but the each house has a use easement to its north. So let me share this again, so this makes more sense. From current slide, see if I can make this happen. Am I smart enough to use Zoom at 10:30 p.m.? Maybe. All right, so set in the center of the houses so that we don't have to fire rate. But then we used what Charleston calls north side manners. So all of the houses, all of the windows and active rooms are along the south and the east corner of the house. So everybody's looking south. Along the north walls, all the windows are privacy glass, you know, it's stairwells and closets and bathrooms. So windows that don't look into the neighbor's side. And then we have a use easement in this 5 feet between the property line and the house line, so that this house is obligated to maintain this section of land. Although this little strip belongs to this house and they can get in it to paint their wall and whatever they need. This house is obligated to maintain it with a pretty simple easement that's filed with the plat. It's filed with the lot, so every owner inherits it. That has been really successful in this, because you don't need as much fencing, because your fence can just run in between the short sides of the houses, and your yard is wall to wall. And so that's been one approach with single family splits that work really well. And we used that on the mini houses as well. Those also have easements, use easements along the driveways. So the property line, as you can see, is centered in between the units. And then there's a use easement that's 7 feet wide that lets the downhill house use the driveway all the way to the uphill house. And then they're also responsible for maintenance. So we try to split out with easements the exact area that you as a homeowner are responsible for maintaining. And if you don't, your neighbors are going to be mean and you're going to be a jerk. And it's like the guy who doesn't mow his lawn, right? But some of this, we try to be really clear in expectations, and we've had no problems at all on any of these getting maintained to a level that the neighbors are happy with. This one's a little bit trickier. So this one is owned by one owner. They're keeping it long-term as rentals. And so they own and maintain all the landscaping. Each of these houses to to the kind of out away from the common path. They each have a little private backyard that you can let a dog out in. There's often a little, you know, deck or kind of gravel terrace that you've got a patio table or something back in there. So people generally maintain their own private backyard space. The common pathway in the front area is maintained by the owner. Another way that we've seen these done when they're split into condos is that we actually do a POA that's, you know, these 8 people, and they are required to pay a POA due monthly that often then goes to landscaping maintenance. And so there is an enormous efficiency in this many small units, just having one landscape company that they pay to come one time. And so often that's seen as a pro because they're each paying less than they would, you know, to maintain it if they were doing it individually, and it's low maintenance. The lower the maintenance is in this housing type, the more popular it is. So if there's any sort of service or amenity that you can do, like combined housekeeping, combined landscaping, you know, any of that kind of stuff always is a bigger amenity than other stuff that you would see. In terms of multimodal development, one of the things that we found, even in our so we work with developers big to small. Some of our big developers do big multifamily projects, 200 to 300 units of multifamily, you know, some ground floor apartments, what we think of as like really big projects. They have done parking counts, right? Because their requirement to do 1 parking space per bedroom or per unit is an enormous amount of land and money for them. And so they've done parking counts where they'll send some of their interns out, you know, at 6 in the morning, at noon, and at midnight, you know, 5 p.m., different days of the week to count the number of empty parking spaces in their parking lots. And then they've done some really cool graphs and charts so that we can convince cities of how much parking they need because they've counted. And even in their really suburban locations, that like there is not one person that doesn't, you know, own a car you would expect living in this location, right? It's not even on a transit line. They've found 0.75 cars per bedroom is the highest amount of parking that they ever have at any count. And it makes sense when you start to think about, there's always somebody whose car is at the airport because they're out of town. There's somebody who's like staying at their girlfriend's house. There's somebody whose car is in the shop. There's somebody who's working weird hours. And so they're here at, you know, they're using a parking space that somebody else is using the opposite time of day. And so even in those really suburban locations, we need less parking than we think we do. And we've done some developments like this in downtown areas that have no parking whatsoever. And I think that, you know, that historic apartment complex that I showed too, all of those actually have very little parking and people figure it out, right? They park on street, they have a bike, maybe they don't drive a lot, maybe they take an Uber, right? It's not necessarily a city's responsibility to provide and make sure that you have a safe space to store your car. They don't worry about where you're storing your Christmas tree. They don't worry about where you're storing, you know, your frozen pizzas. So let people figure it out. They have historically figured it out fine. And it's also on the developer. If they're not providing parking and that's a hang up for people, then they'll have to figure that out. But we've found not enough parking to be a hang up on people buying or living in housing units 0 times in my entire career.
Wow.
Thank you. Wait. And Alli, I know it's getting late. If you want to take off.
Okay, I might soon. How about one more question?
You got it.
Yeah, I don't have any statistics, but it seems there's an awful lot of housing in Petaluma that is older people living in a large house, a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, that when their family was there, it made sense. I'd like you to discuss, if possible, amenities built into the houses as well as the community amenities that would encourage retirees to move into the smaller house and to buy one of the smaller ones or trade their big house for a smaller one.
The demographics really support exactly what you're saying, right? Most large, and that also gets to the resource allocation issue of our housing. We have a lot of people living in houses that are bigger than they need, and they don't actually have a way to stay in their house. They don't have a way to have more people live in their house with them. They don't have an easy pathway into something different. And so I think that's what a lot of these more holistic zoning code changes and recommendations are about, is giving people flexibility and pathways to find holistic housing that works for them. And one of those is congregate housing, right? I am a current congregate houser, right? So I moved into a big historic house. I'm a single mom. I have a 1.5-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. And I have a woman who lives with me who's a college student who needed, she was one of our babysitters. She's a senior. She moved in with us because we had the space. We're working on, we converted part of the house into an ADU. We're working on getting it rented, right? We do not meet our legal family definition. This is the kind of flexibility though, that like this house has always had big unrelated family groups that lived in it. We have that history. And I think beginning to really open that up and encourage that is something that we've tried to do socially in town as well. One of our biggest housing pressures is college students. The big state university is in, half a mile that way. And so we have 30,000 students. And so the more that we can begin to, how do we pair, right, students with seniors so that you have somebody young to carry your groceries and clean out your gutters and make them do, yard chores, and they have somewhere that is safe and really cheap to live. How can we start to solve this socially in ways that have been made illegal is sort of one question. More directly, your question is kind of the amenities that are really attractive to that. So one of them that we've approached is just the cost standpoint, right? Cost and maintenance. That if you have a little new construction 1-bedroom house, right, it's really easy for you to maintain. You can sell your existing house. You can pay for this one in cash and have a huge amount of savings that you can put in something else to be living on. So you have a way to access equity to live on immediately. And you also have significantly less maintenance. You can lock the house and leave and go and visit your grandkids for 2 months, go to Europe for a month. You can live a lifestyle that is not just geared around taking care of this big house that you have that isn't even necessarily meeting your needs. And so I think a lot of it's a social question more than it is an amenity question, in my experience. Okay, I am going to go to sleep because that baby is going to wake up so much earlier than you guys.
Understood.
This has been so much fun.
Thank you very much.
Dave has my email. I hope he'll give it out to you. And if you guys have questions, comments, concerns, success stories when you get your general plan done, I hope that you'll share them with me and that we can stay in touch.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks guys.
If we want to keep talking, we certainly can. We have the 3 local architects in town to ask questions that are more locally focused rather than national. And if you want to keep Zoom running, we can keep recording it.
Zoom is still running. I should probably do something that looks a little bit better than my stand-in video there.
We've got a question for,
I want to ask you, who is taking the lead on rewriting or writing our new zoning code? Who does that?
I think it's definitely going to be staff. I think probably more in group than Rainey, but I don't know that for a fact. That's the way it's approached to us. And then they've talked about the land use working group of the GPAC being the public side of that general plan update. That's actually, it's going to be the successor to what was the housing working group last time around, which was Alli Thurmond, Chris Rebelo, and me. And I hope the hell they're going to include more people on it this time around because it's a big task. You asked me on it? Yeah. Hopefully Sharon will be there too. So, does that help?
Yeah.
We might ask questions up, not to be asking questions. Who would have a local architect?
Will the GPAC have a downtown work group that actually looks at just our downtown area as a single unit for all aspects?
That's a really fun question, especially given the overlay issue. Why don't you email me tomorrow so I don't forget about that? And I will talk with Alli, who I at this point assume will be the coordinator of the land use group. I think that can be a subgroup of land use. Probably should be.
Yeah, I would agree.
Email me if you could.
It needs to be a separate group working on that entirely.
So Dave, I think it's worth talking about GPAC is reconstituted, not under the Brown Act, so we can bring in other people, who would like to work on various aspects of any of the elements.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can have combined meetings of the GPAC. You know, when we were a Brown Act group, I couldn't reach out to the GPAC and say, come to my house for a year. As soon as we came out of the Brown Act, I did that. Only about 6 of us did it. But the conversations were great, and we need to keep doing it more. And I invited the entire GPAC to be here this evening. And I think there are 3 of us here.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mary, you stepped in late. 4 of us. 5. Yeah.
Wow, great.
When with all your friends on the GPAC, you sort of forget who fits where. So sorry. But I mean, so, good. You're not 6.
Partly to answer Pete's question. The last general plan, there was a whole zoning code rewrite going on. So I was on it, I know, Larry was on it. There's a bunch of people on it that all of a sudden, that pulled out from under us. So 2008, it just went to the wash on the whole thing. So that thing was literally half written or rewritten. That's why our current zoning ordinance is so goofy.
Yeah,
But I think the point is that lots of people can, I think, pull their resources and give input on that.
Yeah, I think the old zoning code, the current zoning code, other than the little miscellaneous edits, probably dates back to 1990 or thereabouts.
Well, even older, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, 40 years old. That's pretty ridiculous, especially when you're doing this kind of conversation.
I'd like to comment about the zoning code being revised, but only using one end of the pencil. Yeah.
Come on, give me something else. There's a lot of content there.
And just on the state goals, just a reminder, we have a tree ordinance that's also ahead of the actual building ordinances, and also a cannabis ordinance rewrite that needs to be done too. And that is top 10 goal. So hope that it's all going to happen. I was real surprised that so much has happened in the last 2 months. I was like, we were bugging, like I was part of the GPAC, and I'm really disappointed nothing was happening for 6 months. And all of a sudden, bam, we get the ATP, we get the flood mapping, and we get blueprint for carbon. So all that's happened very quickly. So I'm hoping that if we get the fairgrounds settled down in the next couple months, then hopefully we'll be working on the ordinances. Will be the next thing that we'll be working on that.
Well, the other thing we've seen, and you may not have looked at it yet, we got the draft goals for silver rise and flooding risk, which is it's a cutting edge tool to the point that I'm even uncomfortable with it. When you get a chance to look at the GPAC package from 2 weeks ago, University stuff.
John, I have a question, and it relates to housing, but is anybody relooking at the Airbnb ordinance and how many properties are taken up by vacation rentals?
There is the visitors folks having some of that data, and I've talked to them that they have some feel for that. And since we don't have an immediate issue right now, it's sort of like it's bubbled down. It was bubbled up for a little while, but it's bubbled down, I think, for the time being. But I think when we did the ordinances, that may be included in the whole rewrite gets done.
You're just looking for like a number count of like.
Well, not just a number, but just that we're looking for housing, for people on more of a long-term basis. And I think our town is still fairly well populated with vacation rentals.
When I came up in GPAC a couple of months ago, I got some pretty good feedback from Heather on specifics I can share with you. Planning doesn't believe it's as big a deal as I think it is, but there are a lot of
For the visitors there, they're all paying, in theory, paying tax. The TOZ tax.
Okay. Anything else in this room? Wait.
Well, it's not exactly on topic. It seems that people moving to small houses, especially those that don't have parking, don't necessarily have a car to carry their groceries. How do we see to it that markets are within walking distance for people if they're walking and aren't bought up by somebody in the future and made into whatever? How do we guarantee accessibility of food to retirees or anybody living in a small unit?
Grocery land trust.
Sharon, brainstorming is a great idea. I think there's 2 answers there, Dwayne. The whole 15-minute concept, which has been broached through the GPAC supportive of it. We push a little bit as we get to the land use element of the general plan, but it's certainly on the table. The other thing is, and I have not read it yet, I just got the data yesterday. There is a new approach to neighborhood zoning that's been pioneered in San Diego, where it allows and maybe even mandates a grocery store in every district, but without specifying where that grocery store goes. So if you live in this 6-block area, you can put a grocery store anywhere you want, as long as you're the first one, which I think gets to a point where that store is sustainable. A second one might push both of them out of business. I have not read it yet. Andrew Triple briefed me on it. He's written an article on it. He just emailed me today, and I just haven't had time to look at it. But it's something I'll be looking into and sharing with others.
Here's another concept that I'd like to share. I just went to the micromobility conference for USA. It was just locally right here in the Richmond area. And what several communities around the US now are being tested out is micro mobility delivery systems. So it's like takeout. So instead of Amazon trucks coming and UPS trucks coming to every neighborhood 3-4 times a day, you would have folks on bicycles, electric bikes with delivery systems on them. I mean, they can have a lot of cargo, or small, medium, or large. And I saw several types out there that folks are playing with that. And there's companies out there making money. If we form partnerships, city and private partnerships now, develop a micro mobility along our bike paths. We could actually, instead of having, I got to go to the store and buy groceries and bring it home. No, it's called love, and it's free delivery, basically, and the grocery store pays for the delivery type of thing. And so there's that's being tested out and tried in several communities now, and there's entrepreneurs out there working on this. And so I'd like to propose it, just to throw that out as an idea, that put that in our vision statement, that maybe a micro mobility delivery system where everybody's paying a little bit, but it's like Uber basically for goods, services, and people in our town.
Email me with that one also for the micro mobility working group.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a link to send you on that.
Very good. Thank you.
Whatever happened, John, to the city bike contract that was supposedly going to happen a couple of years ago?
One company went out of business. But I just talked to the county that's working on it now, and we're getting close, I'm told, to a new company, a new contract for bicycle services for the train stations and maybe some other places down if we can set that up. So apparently the county is working with several cities here. So hopefully maybe so is what I heard.
Okay, great.
There's all new, the rideshare program, all new facilities that are being built now that you can obtain that have more technology on them, so you know where they're at, and you're hooked up and located. And move. This is my parents, they all got left in the pile somewhere and never got moved. So that's my parents got rid of them. But there's now technology companies that are helping folks make sure they get back to where they're supposed to be.
And I believe this time around it's going to include electric scooters also, which you didn't last time.
Yeah.
So Chris, maybe we can talk a little bit about the density. That was a big part of her presentation. I mean, I have to agree with Dan, right?
Yeah.
That the density she was showing, I had to scratch my head on a little bit, especially the one over 69 units per acre. It's like
Those were
pencil
really
out in my head. But just in terms of the GPAC and the general plan, is there discussion about rezoning areas currently right now, not in the specific plan? It's 30 units to the acre, which is really not dense enough for the downtown. Is that something that you guys have already talked about on your agenda?
I would assume it's on our agenda. Until last week, there really has never been a land use working group, which is with the group that should have been dealing with that. It's sort of now been formed. I think Alli will chair it, and she's yet to put a meeting together. But I would assume we're working in that direction, and I think we need to.
Yeah. Kind of implied in the mission statement, I think, is that we increase density.
Good point. Thank you. Anything else? I convinced these three architects to be here tonight because we're going to get questions for them. So help me out here, guys.
Been here anyway.
You know, I just have one comment that I think all of us in the design business, it's an observation we all share, that with all the new state regulations that are relaxing they're making it easier to build different kinds of housing units. Those are relaxation of the rules just in the planning realm, but in the building department, in the fire department, everything we build is just looked at as normal building. So all those other rules in building and fire have not been relaxed, and very often I get exactly the opposite sense from what Alli was talking about. How can we get to yes? It often feels like we are just met with a bunch of no's, reasons why we can't do whatever we want to do. And I think it's one of the reasons that so many people choose to do things without a permit if they think they can get away with it.
Yeah, I think the one exception is, and much to just our chagrin, is that the state actually said for ADUs, for instance, if the house does not have fire sprinklers,
Right.
ADU does not.
Right, and
That was actually a deal breaker for a lot of people. Before that, the state stepped in. A lot of times it sounds simple to put in fire sprinklers until you realize it means coming all the way out, changing your water meter, getting back to the main. And it was, thousands and thousands of dollars where people just would say no. But that's the only exception to the code that I can think of. But you're right.
Some of her site plans in multifamily housing, I was looking for the, 30-foot fire truck easement.
Right.
Access has got to go through there. It's like, doesn't always work.
Well, and speaking of street trees, I'll just jump on Jessica because she's not here. We're looking at objective design standards for the SB 35 projects. And we were in a meeting and Jessica was there and I wasn't quite sure why she was there because they were design guidelines. Until I realized she was advocating, without saying it, basically for no street trees on these projects. And it's because in her world, in the fire world, where danger everywhere, if you have a tree too close to the 4-story apartment building, that's ends up being potential for a fire bridge, right? So they're starting, she would like, and other fire marshals would like to approach cities the same way they're approaching the urban wild interface, which I can't say it's appropriate. I don't know what their statistics are, but what it really means is no street trees when these projects.
That's what they're pushing because they are trying to meet fire hardening standards. There's an insurance crisis going on in California right now. And so people are going to start losing their policies. And this is really coming from the insurance companies, behind the insurance companies, where they don't insure properties unless they meet these requirements. What's going to happen, hopefully, by the end of 2024 is there going to be some guidelines. They may be more stringent than the current fire hardening guidelines. What happens is basically you either get current FAIR plan, which was put in place in California after the Watts riots, because all the insurance companies pulled out. It's not really like a long-term plan that way, but people are being forced to go to that because they don't have any other insurance requirements. So this is really a huge issue that way. That's not going to be resolved unless you do some mitigation that way. It's not going to go away. So people are going to start losing their insurance policies. They already are, unless we meet these standards, which are supposed to come out at the end of 2024, but they're going to be very stringent. And so,
you're talking about for urban, these are urban standards?
Well, right now it's higher fire risk areas, but what the word is within the I still don't know about insurance, but what I'm hearing within the insurance industry is that it's going to be expanded upon in different fire zones. So it's a huge issue that we have. It's something on a weekly basis we're trying to address right now. So I think it does have to be, and I've talked to Dave about this, like I think it does have to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, in terms of like affordable housing, you're going to have insane insurance policies that people aren't going to afford. So I think there's going to have to be like, again, this is coming from the investors behind the insurance industry. They're saying we're just not going to invest in California policies anymore. So there's going to have to be some middle ground there.
Yeah, so it's quality of life versus loss of life.
To reduce our use of energy to heat home or cool a home, the talk is put a tree next to the home.
Well, it's not only that, but right, there's the canopy, the Yeah,
Yeah,
Well, not to mention, like, if we're talking about fire risks in urban areas, could we talk about gas lines? That's probably a bigger
No.
issue than
No.
street trees catching a spark. Hello.
You have to convince the insurance companies and the investors behind the
You
insurance.
know, I guess they know.
They
They're
don't,
just looking in the wrong place.
they could, but it's still gonna be a huge.
Yeah, yeah, oh, no, no,
So-
no argument there.
Can't let it.
Right, right.
And I really enjoyed the speaker we had. And one thing I got right from the beginning, she talked about working with these new ideas. We all have to get on the same page and work together to get that solution going. And so I see that in our city, and maybe extending all the way back to the finance realm or something. We don't have yet a shared sense of the transformation we have to go through as a culture to at least meet the demands of the climate issue, which this fits into very well. That we have to make huge changes at depth and, fresh new ideas and get them on the table and get them working somehow. So that's where I am. And so as our cities, we do the revising the planning code, we have to be bold and find ways to experiment with stuff and just start making it happen. But just playing around the edges, I'm seeing some of that in their the carbon blueprint. It's the kind of playing, it's got to go deeper. And I don't know if it can go deeper until we have a shared sense of the depth of transformation we have to kick
Thank you,
off.
Ned.
Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay, so anyway, she was wonderful.
glad you enjoyed.
And I'll also say that in somewhere in that greenhouse carbon reduction blueprint document, there's one or more passages that acknowledge the scope and the depth of the transformation that we all have to be willing to face. It says it in a couple of places, but then that message doesn't really carry
No, they
through.
get it dissolved somewhere. It doesn't, it's not.
And, I had a concern with that same document and the language in it, because it talked about carbon neutrality, but really only talks about a carbon equation that's based on the emissions from our cars.
Just
emissions
direct
from the buildings.
emissions. Yeah, they're skipping the rest of
So
it.
they're skipping the rest of it, and they're still calling it carbon neutrality, which is an impossible.
No, they're starting with the wrong definition.
So the wrong definition on that, wrong, basically
I'm
the wrong
working on
equation.
that
So,
now.
so
I write the
then
whole
I've
thing.
talked about this a little bit in the past. But we need to talk about carbon reduction, carbon footprint reduction, not just carbon emission reduction. So carbon footprint reduction, and if we even get to 50%, that would be phenomenal. That's like the same, we're gonna say, well, we're not gonna get to 85% of the emissions. So if we do all that, we're not even getting down to 50%
Right.
carbon footprint reduction.
Which is-
So, anyway, so yeah, it is said in the document a couple times, as I said, is some phrases here and there,
Yeah.
but we need to make sure that that's upfront and so acknowledged, and then say we really need to do much more transformation than what's in the document itself at this time, because it's not a carbon neutrality document goal as stated, as far as I can tell.
So my thinking about what Ned said and point well made, John, is that this idea of getting on the same page seems to be the biggest challenge. We have it in the smallest of things, in our public art and our overlay district, which is now 3 postage stamp areas in the downtown. And people are, absolutely, I don't want any change. So how do you do it? I mean, I feel like you almost have to do it one conversation at a time, and you have to have lots of people willing to do that. Otherwise, it only takes one person to burn a house down, and it takes so many people to make something beautiful.
Goats.
So how do we do it?
You need goats.
Maybe goats. I caught that. I was at the tail end of this. Chicken and goats. We have sheep here too.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's so hard. I don't have the answer, but you guys have been pounding this drum for a while, so please tell us.
I keep being told we made a difference doing this too, and I guess we have, but yeah, it's still one conversation at a time, and looking for as many conversations to have as possible. I'm thrilled by the turnout this evening, especially in this room. This is marvelous. Thanks to all of you for being here.
Thanks for a host.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think we need to involve younger people, so we're all, I dare say, over a certain age. And I think that we need, I think younger people do want some of these changes, and if we spend all of our energy trying to talk to people that don't want anything to change, we'll
Right.
burn ourselves out. I don't think that's the correct focus, I really don't. And so bring the young people you know to the
They should
table.
be the leaders of this
I
whole
know.
movement.
Yeah,
But they're not.
No, they're not.
Like, I mean, they're not gonna be here right now because they're trying to get their kids to sleep.
Mhm.
They have to get up tomorrow because they're still trying to get their career started. I mean, I think like part of this is like trying to figure out ways how to reach that demographic,
Mhm.
like that they can make it here, because they're just not gonna come here, or to the city council meetings or things like that. Because, like, I mean, I can get a person there one time. And then after that, it's like, I had to get my babysitter there and things like that, and so
No,
like,
it's really
we
true,
had to
yeah.
figure out ways that we can reach that demographic.
Dave, can you
that
post
want to
something
live
on
their
TikTok,
terms.
maybe?
Or, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, why not high school kids or junior high kids and let them know that, like, hey, your opinion matters and you can actually, like, if I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to put my bike on the street in this town, like, just walk it through downtown when I was here. If someone would have told me, like you can actually have an influence, I think they'd get involved. So I just think, like, the earlier the better. You know, I mean, I believe that if you reached out to the young kids and said, hey, you can actually have a viable voice here, I think you get a percentage that would get involved. But we have to be on their terms.
Yeah, just to let you know, that yesterday, there was a meeting, my principal that I was working with that is now at the district office, with the school district, Dan Osterman, and he's just started yesterday, there was a big meeting, lots of nonprofits, students and teachers showed up, and there's a new push now to bring back environmental literacy and climate change education is now what the package is being called. It's also being tied to safe routes to schools, and so Dan Osterman is now leading that charge at the school district and pushing that through. And so that's going to spread out, and every school is going to be required to do a safe routes to school program or set it up, and then hopefully the city is going to start helping that with quick builds and get that done first. So that's one of the things that's happening right now. The other thing is, Kevin and I was on a tour today. We went down to Mare Island, and they have FOS, factory for off-site construction, which is stackable buildings. So we got a really nice tour today, and I was really impressed with their ability. And they're building in several local areas here in the North Bay, everything including Berkeley and Oakland and other in San Francisco. And these stackables are going on. They're like 13 foot wide by 27 foot, but they have all sorts of different designs, stackable up to 6 stories tall, and they can do it at less than half the cost of regular construction. So we can actually get the cost down on a per square foot, half of what it is now for if we use this style of construction in our stackable apartment construction. So just to be aware that it was, I was really impressed today by the FOS, factory of off-site construction.
Is that the former Blue Home facility?
Yes, yeah. Well, I was there 10 years ago when it was Blue Homes, and I was impressed then when they did, but apparently they ran into financial difficulties. They were doing customs, one-offs, and doing that in the factory setting. These guys are doing like 50 unit minimum type thing for the most part, for the size of apartments they was to make it. It's a production factory. Sure. And that's how, and they're hiring all sorts of at-risk people completely unionized, and they're doing everything. It's a wonderful program they've got going down there. So think about it as if we can encourage developers that, hey, think about, hey, can we go out there and use stackables and get your costs down?
If I can circle back to 2 topics that came up a moment ago. Social media, Urban Tech needs to do more of that. Sharon did a marvelous job with her team with social media for the film festival. But it took people that we were paying people to do it, and we spent the budget to do it. To the extent any of you can come to the table, help us fundraise, help us with doing the social media itself, adding to our budget. With regard to young people, Sean has talked to me about trying to come up with a tactical urbanism program involving young people. I mean, if you saw the movie at the film festival, that should be inspiring to young people. We need to be cautious they don't do something really stupid. But, Sean's probably spearheading that at this point, but trying to figure out how to pull that ahead is tough. So we need more hands pulling on the rope. Dan?
And I will note that the last city council meeting I was at had a large contingent of young people who stayed past the thing that we left for, because they were there for the skate park on the list. Give them things they care about, they'll be there. Of course, those are very special kids, but like Olympic contender kids.
Just building on what you're saying, on next door, they had the post from the city survey. How would you envision the Kenilworth Park? And so I thought that could be a great opportunity for kids to do, that this could be their park and how they want to use it and see it.
Yeah, or Scott's Ranch, they're working on a park development right now, and in my opinion, it's really gonna underserve the community. It would be great to get high school kids involved and voice their opinion, like, oh, we want this here. So yeah, I mean, those type of projects are all around that way.
Do they have to do community outreach and things like that? Do they have to do a community project?
I don't know. So, I think they do have some hours that are required. So, but I think those are like loosely filled. I'm not exactly sure.
Anything else? So we truly went right out of steam at this point? Okay.
She was great, Dave. She was
really
awesome.
Her energy is so good.
Oh, yeah, she thinks that's what
Okay, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
3 weeks from tonight, 2 weeks from tonight. Ravina Lane up at Stavros.